Hello, I have the honor and the pleasure to present you my work, comparative study of hardware implementation for the recognition of the premature ventricular contraction. I would first like to thank you for your interest in my work. Medical knowledge and the exact identification of disease has become more numerous and complex, which make the task of a doctor more difficult. To remedy this problem, the qualities of the new technique have become possible solution to this complexity. Hence, the birth of automated diagnostic support system. Most of these systems are based in the principle of classification where it uses algorithm and technique. The main purpose of which is to help experts in their diagnosis. Among this technique, we find a neural network that show great potential in the field of medical diagnosis. The system can be implemented according to two scenarios, either in the software, where the information is processed in a sequential mode, or in hardware, way in which the information processing is carried out in parallel. In medicine, diagnostic support system consists in extracting relevant information from a large volume of data, and the processing of this data in sequential mode involves a significant amount of time in order to establish the diagnosis because of the frequent access to the memory of the system. On the other hand, the processing of this data in parallel mode makes the task easy for the expert. By providing him with a time scheduled for the recognition of the method in real time, and this by a hardware implementation of the classifier. We find the interest of this time when it comes to critical case like the cardiac arrest of the patient and under intensive care, where the immediate intervention of the doctor is more than necessary of the survival of the patient. Implementation can be done using high interrogation density circuit dedicated to the application ASIC or the reconfigurable circuit FPGA. Our choice was oriented on the latter because they offered an interesting compromise between the flexibility of processor and the performance of the wired logic. Their manufacture and their test are short and inexpensive step compared to an ASIC which requires and mandatory visit to the foundry. To present our work, we will follow the plan which begin with an introduction propose the classifier model under the MATLAB environment, present our material design using two different calculation principle, semi-parallel and parallel. Then we present a comparative study between the two designs. By adding, of course, this work with a conclusion and perspective. Therefore, as part of our work, we have chosen to perform a classifier for the recognition of cardiac arrhythmias. The targeted arrhythmia of which is the parameter ventricular contraction, which is characterized by a parameter and the large QRS complex and an absence of the wave P. To do this, we use 7 descriptors in order to have two classes, the normal case or the pathological case. The classifier was trained by the backpropagation algorithm and from 14 recurrents from the Amanti database. Therefore, the classifier is a multi-layer perceptron of 7 neurons in the input layer, 3 neurons in the hidden layer, and 1 neuron in the output layer. Knowing that the activation function used for each neuron is the simulation hyperbolic tangent. For the classifier test, we choose other records from the Amanti database. The material design of the classifier has been achieved by adopting two principles of calculation: semi-parallel and parallel. The use of the first principle consists in the transmitting the information sequentially from one layer to the other by performing a parallel calculation in the same layer of classifier. And the application of the second principle allows to transmit information from one layer to the other in parallel, always performing a parallel calculation in the same layer of the classifier. For design, we present the data on 8 bytes in space -1 plus 1 in fixed points and in the tau complements. In order to optimize our architecture as much as possible, it is important to understand the mathematical operation of the network. So each formal neuron carries out two phases. The first represents the calculation of the weighted sum of the inputs of the neuron, and the second phase concerns the function activation. For this, we have chosen the use of function generator, which are found in the logic block of the FPGA. This LUT is a memory part of which we can store the volume of the inform sample taken from the sizing function in the interval -1 plus 1 in order to obtain a precise expression. Use the first principle, the semi-parallel. The concentration of the neuron is presented as follows, of which the hardware implementation of the activation function is a difficult task, accounted by a designer, especially for non-linear functions such as the segmented hyperbolic tangent. The direct implementation of this function using LUTs is very expensive because it is memories which require a lot of logic resource of the FPGA, and as we used a semi-parallel principle, we used only the block of function for all neuron in the same layer. So the neuron become a no complex a complete neuron. So the neural network will be composed of two layers, two blocks of the activation function and a comparator, all or signals necessary for the proposed functional of the classifier are controlled by sequencer. Now we go to the second hardware design of the classifier, which uses the principle of parallel calculation. In this architecture, the values of these input parameters arrive at each neuron in the hidden layer at the same time, performing a parallel computation in that layer, and then their response go to the output layer at the same time. So the number of multipliers and address will depend on the numbers of inputs to that neuron, as a neuron in a hidden layer will be made up of 7 multipliers and 7 others. A computational block which contain the values of the synthetic weight and the based and the bias and activation function. Then the classifier will be composed of 3 blocks of similar neuron from the hidden layer, one neuron from the output layer, and a comparator. We have added the register to store the 7 parameters. These registers are provided with a common clock to synchronize the classifier. And in order to evaluate the effect of our hardware approaches, we follow the phrases processor in the design flow, starting with the trying of the classifier under the MATLAB environment in order to record the final values of the synaptic weight and the throughout each neuron. We implement these values in the hardware design. Then we simulate this classifier under the model sim environment in order to have the class. Finally, to synthesize was carried out under Excellence ISE environment in order to calculate the number of logical resources used by the FPGA. We find that the classification rate is almost for the hardware implementation as well as for the software approach. We used the same classifiers for the two hardware design in order to carry out a comparative study according to two criteria. The classifier adopting the semi-parallel principle consumes a lot of flip-flop compared to the second classifier using the parallel principle, which does not need the flip-flop because it is purely combination block by comparing the number of block of input output, which are numerous in the second classifier compared to the first. So, second classifier is a 39% resource consumer, as seen from the maximum parallelism exploitation at all levels. While the first classifier's users only 22% logical resource. The second criteria is the computation time, of which we present the time performance by the two hardware design. And as an indication, we have exposed the computation time under MATLAB. Knowing that the later work under Windows environment, which is a multitasking system. Generally speaking, the calculator time to recognize a class using two semi-parallel principle is after 10 clock cycle. But adopting the parallel principle, the class is specified in the clock cycle. So, in conclusion, the use of two calculation principles, semi-parallel and parallel, always used to realize two different hardware architecture of the same neural classifier. These neural classifiers are performed to recognize cardiac arrhythmia without detecting overflow. On perspective, the large amount of data in the field of medical image processing requires real-time resolution, which favors the development of FPGA-based hardware implementation. Finally, thank you for your attention.